Thomas here with Much Props, going to give you another how-to video. Today we are doing something kind of unique and different, I guess you could say. I've been watching some videos on YouTube of people making oversized D20 die, and I wanted to make one too, but I didn't want to have to sit and try and figure out the perfect angle to make all of those triangles with, so I'm going to take a different approach than I saw in some other people's videos and make some straight cuts, basic shapes, kind of modular style, and put it all together. And with the foam I'm going to be using, which is What the Foam, it's super rigid and hopefully it will make the die super sturdy without actually connecting the triangle seams, which you'll see here in a minute what I'm talking about. I'm going to use some Cos-Tools to kind of cut my shapes nice and straight and make the assembly a little bit easier as far as shooting out a bunch of copies of the same shape. So today we are building a giant D20 die out of foam. Let's get to building. I did make a template for this video, although it's pretty simple. The base is made up of equilateral triangles held together with rectangles. No joke. To mainstream the process, I mark the height of the triangle on both sides of my 6mm What the Foam, and using the Cos-Tools channel rail and the straight cutter, I cut out thick strips. It has a dial on the back to adjust the depth of the cut when you plunge it in. I had it set just shy of what I needed to, so my next cut will be where it's supposed to. Then I mark the points on my triangle in a series and make quick work of cutting out 5 triangles per strip. I need a total of 20 for my 20-sided die. Same basic concept for the inside bracket and outside trim piece. This is 2mm What the Foam. This stuff is super dense and I'm hoping that it will make my die rigid as most dies should be. I use the channel rail and the straight cutter again to make nice even straight cuts. I'm cutting on a foam board to extend the life of my blades. It's recommended by the manufacturer, Cos-Tools, so that's what I'm going to do. They also make pretty nice utility knives called the XTD30, which has a nice little twist knob tightener to lock the blade in place. I decided to try assembly this way instead of perfectly beveling the edge of 20 triangles at the right angle for a perfect glue up. I put down a layer of contact cement on the inside of the triangles and the inner brackets. The top and bottom of the die are made up of 5 triangles meeting together in the middle. Tack on the rectangles and try to get it as even as possible. Because I'm assembling it this way, I do have a little bit of wiggle room for errors, so I do 2 assemblies of this part. Then, with the remaining 10 triangles, I align them into a strip with the same basic glue up. This will be the middle strip of the die, and the 2 pieces above will simply just glue on the top and the bottom. My plan is to have a loose assembly with the inner brackets so I can form the icosahedron, and the outer trim pieces will lock it into place and give me my rigidity. Now that the top, bottom, and side assemblies are all done, it's time to join them permanently together. The brackets get glued onto the triangle's sides, and the top and bottom are glued on each end. The first end cap was easy to reach, too, because it's open on one side. The second was a little more tricky. I used my scissors to hold back the flaps on the last one to help me position it before I just let it go. Now these outside trim pieces will cover the gaps that you see here and secure the edges in place, making the whole assembly very rigid. I just tried to lay each piece down as centered as I possibly could and have the tips line up where the triangles meet all together. None of it has to be perfect because I'm going to cover up the seams and some of the imperfections with details later. To add more detail, I cut some thin strips of the same 2mm What the Foam about 1/4 inch wide. I taped them down to some painter's tape and glue up a bunch of strips at one time with contact cement. I also glued up the edges of the die too. Then I simply tacked it onto the edges and trimmed it up as I went. To cover up the seams on my triangles, I cut out a bunch of these little diamond shapes. For these, I just used super glue to quickly glue down a mind-numbing total of 60 of these little boogers. Since this is my own design that I'm just making up as I go, I try and think of ways to hide seams so that they're not abundantly prevalent and it makes it look nice and clean. To make my point look a little better, I decided to glue down some circle details to each one, so to give my circles a flat surface to attach to, I put a sanding disc on my Dremel and flattened each point of my die. For the circles on the tip of my die, I use Cos-Tools hole drill. There are 3 different sizes and I use the largest one. You simply twist it down onto the foam and you have perfect circle details. I originally was going to use this 6mm foam, but later decided for a thinner 4mm instead, just for spacing. I also cut slices off of a 36-inch dowel to kind of give me a stair-stepping on the points. In my research of D20s and the icosahedrons, I learned that the shape was invented by an ancient Greek, and I thought it would be kind of a fun little nod to make my numbers using an old Greek alphanumeric system known as ionic numerals. Of course, let's make this more difficult than it needs to be. So doing the best I could from a bunch of references and using my Cricut cutter, I designed some pieces and cut them out of 2mm craft foam. As if putting this complex shape wasn't hard enough already, let's throw on top of it an unfamiliar language and try to glue these parts into the right place. So I'm using the casting that you see here of a D20 along with a number to ionic numeral reference on my phone to glue them in the proper places and directions. I'm sure I got a couple glued wrong, but oh well. To make the glue up easier, I used super glue and held the pieces lined up with tape to maintain position and not glue my hand to the die. As if it wasn't detailed enough already, I decided to make a bajillion little rivets all over the die using my Dremel. I unscrewed the chuck tip and plunged them all over the edges. I also used a small bit for some smaller rivets on the narrower parts. Not sure how many in total I put down, but I'm sure I will regret this later when I have to individually paint each one by hand. Three coats of Plasti-Dip to make sure I got it all, then a base color of some Rust-Oleum hammered copper. It was of course a little too clean for my liking, so I knocked down some of that shine with a little Plat-Effects acrylic paint. Just push the paint into all the low points, cracks, and crevices, then wipe away a majority of it with a paper towel until you reach the desired dirtiness. Then my last step here, I wanted to make my numbers and rivet details stand out just a little bit more, so I went over them with some gold and silver acrylic paint pens. To me, they are easier to control than trying to dot it with a little paintbrush. Thanks once again to Cos-Tools for sponsoring this video. Because of their generosity, I can bring you more builds and I get to use great tools that I would use regardless anyway. So if you haven't already tried them out, you can find their tools for foam cutting on their website or on Amazon. I have links to them on my Amazon affiliates page in the description below. And we are finished. Here is the end result of my icosahedron, or D20 since it's got, numbers on it. I think it turned out pretty cool, and I didn't want to have to waste a lot of time trying to get that perfect angle bevel to make them all relatively accurate. So using this method was a lot simpler, and because of the sturdiness of the foam I used, it is rigid as could possibly be. I mean, this is made out of foam, and I could probably chunk it on the ground and up against a wall and it not really mess it up too much. So, yeah. Maybe you will try and make one of these D20 or icosahedrons yourselves and impress your friends with the oversized randomness of your die. I mean, you put a couple of spikes on there. Maybe you'll get some.
Yay!
And inevitably, they're going to ask you, how'd you make that? You can give them one of these. Tell them, much props. So, if I used it as a weapon, it could just be chunking a big metal ball at you, so.